This is my true story. I gave everything I had so my son could have a better life than mine. I worked with my hands until they bled, sacrificed my dreams so he could chase his, and built a future I never got to live. But one day, he looked me straight in the eye and called me an old, useless man. My heart cracked that day, not from the insult, but from realizing my own blood had forgotten where he came from. I stayed silent then. But when the lawyer read the papers about his $1 million house, the truth finally spoke for me. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of quiet day that should have felt peaceful. I was sitting at the dining table, the same table I had built with my own hands decades ago. My son sat across from me, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up. His wife moved around the kitchen, talking loudly about vacations and parties, as if I wasn't even there. I tried to ask about his work, just a simple question, but he sighed and rolled his eyes. Then, without warning, he said it. "You're an old, useless man." His words came out cold, sharp, and final. I froze. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. But then he looked at me again, straight in the eye, and repeated it. "You've done nothing for this family." The room went quiet after that. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at the cup of tea in front of me. The same hands that had fed him, carried him, worked for him, now trembled under the weight of those words. His wife didn't stop him. She didn't even look surprised. Maybe she had heard him say it before. Maybe that's what they talked about when I wasn't around. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Every second that passed felt like another reminder that time had taken everything from me, my strength, my place in the house, my respect. He stood up from his chair, adjusting his shirt like nothing had happened. "You should stop sitting here every morning," he said. "You make the place look depressing." Those were his exact words. Depressing. I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice not to break. He walked away, leaving the smell of his expensive cologne behind, a smell that once would have made me proud, but now only made me sick. His wife followed him upstairs, laughing softly about something on her phone. I sat there alone, my chest heavy, my hands still trembling. That wasn't the first time he had disrespected me. Over the years, small things had turned into wounds that never healed. He'd mock the way I dressed, tell people I was too old to understand business, laugh when I couldn't keep up with technology. But this time was different. This time, it wasn't just a cruel joke. It was a declaration. In his eyes, I had become nothing more than a burden, an embarrassment he had to tolerate. The boy I raised with love and sacrifice was now a man who looked at me with disgust. I looked around the house, the shining marble floor, the gold-framed pictures, the polished furniture. Everything screamed wealth and success. But all I saw was emptiness. I had seen houses like this before, built on ego instead of gratitude. He thought this place was his, a symbol of his achievements. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know who had truly built this home, not with money, but with sweat, sacrifice, and years of silent struggle. When he left for work later that morning, I sat outside on the porch for a long time. I watched the cars pass, the children play, the world move on. Inside, my heart ached in a way words couldn't describe. I wasn't angry. Anger fades. What I felt was something deeper, something colder. It was the quiet pain of being erased from your own story. I had spent my entire life making sure he had everything. I never wanted thanks, but I never expected cruelty either. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over in my mind. Old useless man. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that maybe he was just frustrated. But the truth is, it did matter. It mattered because I knew what I had done for him. I knew the nights I skipped meals so he could eat. I knew the days I worked in the rain to pay his school fees. I knew the pain my back still carried from years of labor. And to hear him say I had done nothing, that was a wound that would never heal. Still, I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence is stronger than shouting. I knew life had its way of showing truth, even when people tried to bury it. I didn't know when or how, but I knew one day he would face the reality he had forgotten. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to say a word. The truth would speak louder than anything I could ever say. After that day, I stopped talking much around the house. Words had lost their value there. Every time I tried to speak, I could feel his cold eyes on me, eyes that didn't see a father anymore, just an old man taking up space. So I stayed quiet. I'd wake up early before anyone else, sweep the porch, make my tea, and sit outside until the sun rose. It was easier to breathe in the silence than to hear the sound of my own son's voice filled with contempt. Inside that big house, filled with everything money could buy, there was no warmth left for me. I noticed how things changed after that. They started locking the living room door at night, saying it was for security. My meals were served separately now, like I was a guest who had overstayed his welcome. When guests came over, I was told to rest in my room so I wouldn't embarrass them. Embarrass them. Me, the man who had once carried my son on my shoulders, who had sold everything I owned so he could finish school. I'd sit in my room listening to their laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of pride filling a space that used to feel like home. There was no anger left in me, only silence. The kind of silence that comes when your heart stops trying to be heard. I learned to swallow pain quietly. I smiled when I was expected to. I nodded when he talked about his business, even though every word dripped with arrogance. He loved showing off. The new car, the designer clothes, the house everyone admired, and every time someone praised him, he made sure to mention how hard he worked, how smart he was. Never once did he say who gave him his start. Never once did he remember the hands that lifted him out of poverty. Sometimes, late at night, I'd walk through the house when everyone was asleep. I'd touch the walls gently, like I was trying to remind them who built them. I remembered the day this house was completed. The joy in his mother's eyes. The pride I felt seeing my son move into something I helped make possible. I thought it was our dream back then. But dreams have a way of changing when pride takes over. Now those same walls felt colder, heavier, like they were holding the weight of my silence. There were moments when I wanted to leave, to just pack a small bag and disappear somewhere quiet. But every time I thought about it, something stopped me. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was foolishness. I couldn't bring myself to walk away from the child I had raised, even if that child had forgotten me. I stayed, not for comfort, but because I wanted to see how far he would go before life reminded him what respect truly meant. His wife barely looked at me anymore. To her, I was just an inconvenience. Sometimes she'd talk loudly about sending me to an old people's home, as if I wasn't sitting right there. My son would just nod, half listening, never defending me, never saying a word. I'd watch him and wonder, where did I go wrong? When did I stop being his father and become a shadow in his house? The silence became my only companion. I talked to no one, not even my neighbors. I just watched. I watched him brag to his friends about his success, watched him throw parties in the house he claimed as his own, watched him walk past me without a greeting. And every time he called me useless, every time he ignored me, I held on to one small truth, a truth he didn't know yet. That house, that $1 million home he was so proud of, wasn't his. It never was. He lived every day under a roof built from my sacrifice, a roof legally belonging to me. I never told him because I didn't want to embarrass him. But life has a strange way of revealing secrets when the time is right. So, I waited. Quietly, patiently. Because I knew silence was a weapon stronger than words. I didn't need to defend myself. The day would come when the truth would stand in front of him, undeniable, unchangeable. And when that day arrived, my silence would finally be heard. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat by the window and let my mind wander back to the years that built us. Back to the nights when my back ached from long shifts, when my hands were cracked and bleeding, when my only dream was to see my son live a better life. I remembered walking miles to work because I couldn't afford the bus fare. I remembered the times I skipped meals so he could have enough to eat before school. I remembered selling my old tools, the ones my father had given me, just to buy him books. Every sacrifice I made was done with pride because I thought it would lead him toward gratitude, not arrogance. He was a bright boy once, full of energy, full of dreams. I can still see him in my memory. His small hands holding mine, asking questions about the world, his smile wide and pure. Back then, he used to say he wanted to make me proud. He used to hug me after school and tell me he loved me. I didn't know those words would one day disappear, replaced by disgust and shame. It's strange how time can turn love into distance, and distance into cruelty. When he got older, things changed. I worked 2 jobs when he was in college. During the day, I carried bricks on construction sites. At night, I cleaned offices. My body was tired, but my heart stayed strong because I believed I was building his future. I can still remember the smell of sweat on my clothes, the pain in my knees, the sound of coins rattling in my pocket. Barely enough to live, but enough to give him hope. I paid every bill, every fee, every rent payment on time. I wanted him to stand tall, to live the life I never could. The day he graduated, I cried quietly in the back of the hall. He wore a suit, looked proud, and walked across the stage like he owned the world. When he hugged me afterward, I thought everything had been worth it. He said, "I'll take care of you one day, Dad." I carried that promise in my heart for years. It gave me comfort when work got hard, when loneliness crept in after his mother passed away. I believed those words. I believed him. Then came his first job, his first car, his first big paycheck. He started wearing expensive clothes, eating at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, and spending weekends with people who looked at me like I didn't belong. I was happy for him, even when he stopped visiting as often. But slowly, the distance grew. Calls became rare, visits shorter. Then one day, he moved me into his house, saying it was easier to look after me. I didn't see the truth behind it then, that it was more about appearance than care. He wanted to look like a good son in front of people, not actually be one. That house, the one everyone admired, was built from the savings I had left after retirement. When his business idea failed years ago, he came to me desperate. I sold my last piece of land to help him buy the property. The deed, at the time, went under my name because he didn't have the credit or money. He promised to transfer it later once things settled. I trusted him completely. I didn't care whose name was on it. It was for him. I just wanted him to have something solid, something that would give him a stable future. But as time went by, he forgot. Or maybe he chose to forget. He started calling it his house, bragging to friends about how he bought it with his hard work. Every time I heard him say that, something in me broke a little more. Not because I wanted credit, but because I wanted honesty. I wanted him to remember, to say just once, "My father helped me." But pride doesn't allow truth to live beside it. So I stayed quiet, watching him build his reputation on a foundation I had poured with my blood and bones. Now, as I sat by that same window, the moonlight falling across my wrinkled hands, I realized something. The man who called me old and useless was living under a roof that existed because of me. The same roof that kept him warm, the same walls that protected his family were the ones I paid for. He didn't know it, but soon he would. Life always finds a way to uncover what's buried. I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth to come out. And when it did, I knew it would hurt him more than any words I could ever say. In the weeks that followed, his arrogance only grew stronger. He walked around that house like a king, chest high, voice loud, talking about how far he had come in life. He loved to remind anyone who would listen that he had built everything with his own hard work. Sometimes, I'd sit in the corner of the living room, pretending to read the newspaper, and just listen. He'd brag about his business deals, about his expensive car, about the property that everyone in the neighborhood admired. And every time he said, "I bought this house myself," I felt a sharp pain in my chest, not from anger, but from sorrow. He didn't know, or maybe he didn't care to remember. Either way, the truth stayed buried while his pride grew louder. He started throwing parties almost every weekend. Loud music, laughter, glasses clinking, people talking about money and success. I would stay upstairs in my small room, listening to the noise below. Sometimes I could hear my name mentioned, always followed by mocking tones. "Dad doesn't get it," he'd say to his guests. "He still thinks life is about saving every penny." They'd all laugh, not knowing the irony of those words, because if I hadn't saved every penny, none of them would even be standing under that roof. One evening, I came downstairs for a glass of water while his friends were over. The room went quiet for a second. Then one of them whispered something, and they all started laughing. My son smirked. "Dad, maybe you should go rest," he said loudly, like I was a child interrupting adults. The shame that burned in my chest that night, I can still feel it. I turned around slowly, holding my head down, and went back to my room. I didn't cry. I just sat there in silence, staring at the wall. It's strange how the people you love most can make you feel smaller than anyone else ever could. He believed he was unstoppable. He bought expensive clothes, new watches, things he didn't even need. His wife flaunted her jewelry online, calling it a reward for our hard work. I watched them both live like the world owed them everything. They never once looked back to see who carried them here. I think what hurt the most wasn't the insults. It was the blindness. He truly believed the lies he told himself. He had erased my sacrifices from his story completely. Every time I saw him walk past me without a greeting, I thought about all the nights I had spent working to make his life easier. I thought about my wife, how proud she had been of him. She used to say, "He'll take care of us one day." I never told her before she died that I was afraid that success would change him, afraid that he'd forget who he was. I wish she could have seen what he had become. Or maybe it's better that she didn't. It would have broken her heart. Sometimes neighbors would stop by and compliment him on the house. They'd tell me how lucky I was to live with such a successful son. I'd smile politely, not saying a word. What could I say? That the son they admired was living in a home his father had bought? That every inch of that marble floor was paid for by my sacrifices? People wouldn't believe it. They only see what shines. They never ask where the light came from. I remember one day he brought his lawyer over for dinner. They sat in the dining room discussing finances, future investments, and property papers. I stayed in the kitchen, listening quietly. My name came up once, when the lawyer reminded him of some old document linked to the property deed. My son brushed it off. "Oh, that's just an old technicality," he said, laughing. "The house is mine." The lawyer nodded, but something about his tone caught my attention. There was hesitation, a small pause. It made my heart beat faster. After they left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the lawyer's words. Old document. I remembered the paperwork we signed years ago, my name on the deed, his promise to transfer it someday. I had forgotten all about it until then. Maybe the world had forgotten too. But the law doesn't forget. Paper doesn't lie. As I drifted to sleep that night, a quiet thought came to me. Maybe life was getting ready to balance itself again. I didn't wish him harm. I didn't want revenge. But I knew the truth had a way of showing up when pride got too loud, and my son's pride was screaming. It was only a matter of time before the truth finally spoke, not from my mouth, but from someone else's. A few weeks later, it happened. One morning, his lawyer called and asked for a family meeting. My son told me about it casually over breakfast, as if it was just some routine paperwork. He said they were finalizing documents for a refinancing deal on the house, something about restructuring loans and ownership verification. I nodded quietly, pretending not to care. But inside, my heart felt heavy. I didn't say anything. I just sipped my tea and listened to him boast about how smoothly everything was going. He didn't know that the very papers he was so confident about would soon humble him more than life ever could. The day of the meeting came. The lawyer's office was in the city, big and modern, filled with glass walls and shiny floors. My son dressed sharply in a dark suit, his wife beside him, her perfume filling the car. They barely spoke to me during the drive. I sat in the back seat, looking out the window at the world passing by. My mind wasn't on the meeting. It was on all the years that had led to this day, the pain, the silence, the forgotten kindness. When we reached the office, the lawyer greeted us politely. He was a younger man, respectful, but cautious in his tone. We sat down in a large room with a long wooden table. My son sat proudly at the head of it, like it was his company being discussed. I sat quietly at the other end, hands folded on my lap. His wife scrolled on her phone, uninterested. The lawyer opened a folder full of documents, clearing his throat. "Before we proceed," he said, "I need to confirm the current legal owner of the property in question." My son smiled confidently and leaned back in his chair. "Yes, of course," he said. "It's my house. We just need to finalize the paperwork." I looked at him then, the arrogance still in his posture, the smugness in his voice. He didn't even glance my way. He was too sure of himself, too certain that the world was built to serve his pride. The lawyer nodded slowly, flipping through the pages. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper. Then he stopped. His brow furrowed slightly as his eyes scanned a line on the document. He looked up. "Actually," he said carefully, "according to the title and property deed, the legal owner is not you." My son laughed, waving a hand. "There must be some mistake," he said. "That document is old." The lawyer didn't laugh. He adjusted his glasses and read aloud, his voice steady. "The property, including the land and the structure built on it, is registered under the name of Mr. Father's name. Purchased 15 years ago through a family trust." The words hung in the air like thunder. I could see my son's smile fade instantly. His eyes widened. His wife looked up from her phone, confused. The lawyer continued, explaining the history of the ownership, the payments, the legal transfers that never took place. Every word he spoke was like a hammer striking my son's pride. I didn't say a thing. I just sat there, still, watching the truth unfold in front of him. For years, he had lived in that house thinking it was his. For years, he had called me useless under a roof that was mine. And now, with one sentence, that illusion was gone. His face went pale. His hands started to shake slightly. He looked at me then, for the first time in a long time, not with arrogance, but with fear. The room was silent except for the sound of the lawyer turning another page. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Life had simply opened the curtain. The truth that I had carried quietly for years was now standing in the middle of that room, undeniable. My son leaned forward, trying to speak, but his voice cracked. He asked the lawyer to check again. The lawyer nodded, almost uncomfortably, and said, "There is no mistake. It's all here, signed and recorded. Your father is the sole owner." My son looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. For a man who thought he owned the world, it must have felt like the ground beneath him had vanished. He wasn't angry yet, just lost. His wife, however, was furious. She whispered harshly to him, her eyes darting toward me with disbelief, maybe even disgust. But none of that mattered. I sat there calmly, my old hands resting on the table, my heart strangely light. The lawyer began to gather the documents, clearly uncomfortable with the silence in the room. He said we could discuss how to proceed, but I knew it was already over. The truth had done what it came to do. I stood up slowly, leaning on the table for support. My knees ached, but my spirit felt stronger than it had in years. My son stayed seated, his head low, his pride broken. For the first time, he didn't have a single word to say. The air in that room felt heavy, thick with shock, disbelief, and a silence that no one dared to break. My son sat there frozen, staring at the lawyer like he had just heard the world end. His wife fidgeted beside him, her eyes wide, her hands clutching her handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. The lawyer cleared his throat softly, trying to move on with the papers, but the weight of what he'd said still hung in the air like a storm cloud that refused to pass. I sat quietly, my hands folded on the table, watching my son's world collapse piece by piece without saying a single word. He kept looking between me and the lawyer, as if one of us might laugh and tell him it was all a mistake. But no one spoke. The truth was written there, black ink on white paper. My name, still clear after all these years. I had forgotten what it even looked like on official documents. It felt strange, almost unreal, to see it there again. The house he bragged about, the house he mocked me in, the house he called his. It was never his. It was mine. It always had been. He tried to speak, but his voice came out cracked and weak. "This can't be right," he said, his eyes flicking to the lawyer for reassurance. But the lawyer only shook his head gently. "It's all legal and verified," he said quietly. "The ownership was never transferred." My son leaned back slowly, his confidence draining away like color from his face. I could almost see the moment it hit him. The realization that everything he had built his pride on was standing on my foundation. And now, it wasn't just pride that was breaking. It was his illusion of control. I sat still, calm, almost too calm. For years I had imagined what this moment might feel like. If it would bring satisfaction, if it would heal the pain. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy. Because no father wants to see his child fall, even if that child once pushed him down. I didn't want to destroy him. I just wanted him to understand. Respect isn't given because of money or power. It's earned through humility. And humility is something life forces into you when pride blinds you for too long. He turned his eyes toward me, trembling. For the first time in years, he didn't look at me with disgust. He looked at me like a lost boy, confused, scared, small. It was almost painful to see. His lips parted, but no sound came. I could see the tears forming in his eyes, though he tried to hold them back. His wife broke the silence first. She asked the lawyer if this meant they couldn't refinance, her voice shaking. The lawyer nodded politely, explaining the house couldn't be used for any loan or claim without my consent. Her face twisted in frustration, and she looked at me with blame, as if I had done something wrong by simply existing. I didn't respond to her glare. I just sat there, letting the truth settle into the room. Every breath, every second, felt like justice without cruelty. My son lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes again. He muttered something, maybe an apology, maybe disbelief. I couldn't hear clearly, but I didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than words. The man who once called me old and useless now sat helpless in front of me, not because I wanted him to, but because life had put him there. The lawyer, uncomfortable with the tension, began closing the folder. "If you wish, we can schedule a meeting later to discuss future arrangements," he said softly. I nodded. My son didn't move. He just stared down at the table, hands clenched, breathing heavy. I could tell he wanted to ask me to fix it, to give him back the illusion he had lost. But I also knew this was something he needed to sit with. Pride only learns through silence and pain. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. My knees creaked, but my back stayed straight. I looked at the lawyer, thanked him politely, and turned toward the door. My son didn't follow me. He didn't say a word. I could feel his eyes on me, heavy, desperate, ashamed. I didn't turn around. Some moments don't need words. They just need time. I walked out of that room quietly, leaving behind the man who had mocked me, the wife who had ignored me, and the lawyer who had just witnessed the power of truth. Outside, the wind hit my face. It felt cold, sharp, clean, like something had finally been washed away. I took a deep breath and felt a strange calm inside me. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. The truth had spoken, and it had spoken without me having to say a word. The world has a way of balancing itself, and that day, it finally did. I will never forget the look on his face when the lawyer spoke the truth aloud. It was like watching a storm hit a man who thought he was untouchable. For years he had stood tall, proud, untouchable in his arrogance, and in one moment, his whole world cracked open. "The property belongs entirely to your father," the lawyer had said. So calm, so final. I saw my son's confidence melt away, replaced by disbelief, confusion, and then shame. He blinked fast, his mouth slightly open, trying to make sense of words that refused to change, no matter how hard he stared at them. His wife's hand dropped from his arm, her expression shifting from surprise to something colder, anger mixed with disappointment. She looked at him as if she had just realized the truth too. The empire she thought she married into had never belonged to him at all. He tried to speak again, but his throat tightened. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "That's not possible." The lawyer didn't even flinch. He reached into the folder and slid the original property documents across the table. The sound of the paper brushing the wood echoed in the quiet room. My son stared down at the pages, his eyes scanning the lines desperately, as if he could somehow read them differently this time. But there it was, my name. The same name he had stopped respecting long ago. The same name he had erased from his own story. I watched him trace the letters with his finger, slowly, like he didn't want to believe they were real. The color drained from his face. His hands shook. His wife looked between us, her face tight with disbelief. She whispered something to him, sharp and fast, her voice full of frustration. But he didn't answer. He just kept staring at that paper, at the truth that had finally caught up to him. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. No clever words, no arrogant tone, no proud smile. Just silence. The kind of silence that breaks a man from the inside. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, watching the son who once called me old and useless realize that the roof over his head, the floor beneath his feet, the very house he called his, it all belonged to me. I had built that house not out of pride, but out of love. I had given him everything I could, trusting that one day he would remember who stood behind him when he was nothing. Instead, he had buried my kindness under lies. And now, the truth was digging it back up, piece by piece. He finally looked up at me then. His eyes were red, wet, full of something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of the truth. Fear of how easily life can flip the table when you think you've won. I held his gaze, calm and quiet. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Every insult, every humiliation, every night I went to bed hearing his cruel words. They all came rushing back to him now. Not through my anger, but through reality itself. His wife broke the silence again. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling with both anger and panic. The lawyer nodded, explaining how the house had been purchased through my trust and how ownership was never legally transferred. She turned toward my son, her eyes sharp. "You said you bought this house," she hissed. Her voice shook. "You said it was yours." My son didn't answer. He couldn't. He just lowered his head, the shame too heavy to lift. It was in that moment I saw the cracks in him deepen. All those years he spent mocking me, calling me useless, pushing me aside. They all came crashing down at once. The man who once laughed at my old clothes now sat in front of me, powerless. The silence in the room was thick. Even the lawyer looked uncomfortable, glancing between us, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. But I stayed still. I wanted him to feel this moment, to let it carve itself into his memory. Because this wasn't revenge. This was truth doing its work. He finally managed to whisper, "Dad." His voice was small, broken, unsteady. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, and in that look was everything I had never said. You forgot where you came from. You forgot who carried you. You forgot the hands that built the foundation you're standing on. He understood. I could see it in the way his eyes dropped, the way his shoulders sank. The realization hit him harder than any punishment ever could. When the lawyer closed the folder, the sound made him flinch. The meeting was over. The truth had been read. The illusion was gone. I stood up slowly, leaning on my cane. My son didn't move. His wife sat in silence, staring at the floor. I looked at him one last time before turning toward the door. My voice was calm when I finally spoke. The first words I had said in that room. "Now you know," I said softly. Then I walked away. I could feel his eyes following me as I walked out of that office, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The truth had already done what years of silence never could. That one revelation stripped him of all the pride, all the arrogance, all the false confidence he had built around himself. For years, he thought he was the man in control, the one who built his own empire, the one who didn't need his father. But now he was sitting in a chair, broken, staring at papers that told him everything he owned was never really his. I stepped outside into the cold air, breathing deeply, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, not victory. Just quiet, steady peace. Because justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives silently, with a few words on a piece of paper. I waited by the car for a while before they came out. His wife walked past me first, not saying a word. Her face was stiff, her lips pressed tight, her eyes avoiding mine. I could tell she was angry, not at me, but at him. The image she had built of her perfect husband, the successful man with $1 million home, had shattered in front of her. She walked ahead, heels clicking fast against the pavement. Then he came out. His steps were slow, his shoulders heavy, his face pale. He didn't look like the man who used to laugh at me. He looked like a boy again, lost, scared, and smaller than I had ever seen him. We rode home in silence. The only sound was the hum of the car and his shaky breathing. He didn't speak, didn't look at me, didn't even glance in the mirror. I sat in the back seat, watching the city pass by, my heart full of memories. I remembered carrying him to school when he was little, his tiny hands wrapped around my neck. I remembered his laughter when I bought him his first bicycle. I remembered the tears in his eyes when he failed his first exam and how I told him failure was just another step toward success. I remembered all the things that made me love him, and all the things he had forgotten. When we reached the house, he didn't open the door for me like he used to. He just walked ahead, shoulders slumped. His wife followed him inside, silent. I walked slowly, each step echoing through the hallway. The house felt different that day. It didn't feel like theirs anymore. It felt like mine again. Every corner, every picture frame, every piece of furniture felt like it was finally returning to me. Not in ownership, but in truth. He sat on the couch, head in his hands. His wife stood near the window, her arms crossed. No one spoke. The silence was heavy, almost painful. I looked at him and saw the man who once called me old and useless, now sitting in a house he didn't own, surrounded by the emptiness of his pride. It wasn't revenge that filled me. It was sadness. Because this was never how I wanted things to end. I had dreamed of seeing him grow, of seeing him succeed and still remain humble. I had imagined us sitting together, sharing stories, laughing over tea. But instead, here we were, a father and son divided by arrogance, by greed, by the price of forgetting love. He finally lifted his head. His eyes were red and tired. "I didn't know," he said quietly. His voice trembled, almost breaking. I didn't answer. What was there to say? Words wouldn't fix what pride had destroyed. He lowered his gaze again, whispering something I couldn't hear. Maybe it was regret, maybe apology. But even if it was, it came too late. Some wounds can't be healed with words. They need time, and sometimes silence. Later that night, I heard them arguing behind closed doors. Her voice was sharp, full of anger. His was weak, defeated. I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't block it out. She was asking him how he could let this happen, how he could lie about something so big. He didn't fight back. He just kept saying, "I didn't know." I could hear her crying, slamming a door. The sound echoed through the house like thunder. Pride was gone, replaced by shame. I sat on my bed, staring at the photo of his mother on the nightstand. I whispered softly, "You see now, don't you?" Life taught him what we couldn't. I felt tears roll down my face, but they weren't tears of joy or sorrow, just release. 10 years of humiliation, silence, and pain had come full circle. I didn't take anything from him that day. I didn't punish him. Life had already done that for me. When morning came, the house was quiet. He didn't come downstairs for breakfast. His wife had left early. I sat alone, drinking tea in the same kitchen where he once called me useless. But this time, I wasn't angry. I was free. The truth had spoken, and it didn't need to be repeated. I had carried pain for years, and now it was gone. All that remained was a calm understanding that respect can't be bought, and pride always finds its way back to the ground. The next day, he finally came to see me. I was sitting outside in the small garden behind the house, trimming the plants like I did every morning. The air was still, quiet, heavy with a kind of peace that comes only after truth has spoken. I heard his footsteps behind me, slow, hesitant, like a child who didn't know how to face what he had done. I didn't turn around right away. I let him stand there, let him think about every word he wanted to say. For years, I had waited for a moment like this, not for revenge, but for honesty. He stood there in silence for a while. I could feel the weight of his guilt without him saying a thing. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, trembling. "Dad, I didn't know." I swear I didn't know. I didn't respond. My hands kept working, pulling weeds, cutting dry leaves. It wasn't anger that kept me quiet. It was something deeper. I had spoken to him so many times before, pleaded for understanding, tried to remind him of love, respect, humility. None of it had reached him, but life had done what my words couldn't. So I stayed silent and let him speak. He kept talking. His words spilled out, broken and heavy. He said he never meant to hurt me, that he thought I wanted him to take control, that he thought I had given up everything willingly. He said he didn't realize the house was still under my name, that he never checked, that he just assumed. Every word sounded weaker than the last. I heard regret in his tone, but it was the kind that comes after the damage is already done. He talked about how his wife was angry, how everything was falling apart, how he didn't know what to do now. I finally put down the scissors and looked at him. His eyes were red, his face tired, his hands trembling. This wasn't the same man who once stood tall and called me useless. This was a broken version of him, humbled by truth, stripped of pride. He looked at me like a child again, lost and afraid. For a moment, I felt the old ache in my chest, the one that comes from loving someone too deeply, even after they've hurt you. I spoke softly. "You called me useless." I didn't forget that he opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "You thought my age made me weak. You thought my silence meant I had nothing. But I wasn't silent because I was powerless. I was silent because I wanted you to learn. And now, life has taught you in ways I never could." My words weren't angry. They were steady, calm, heavy with years of pain and patience. He nodded slowly, his eyes filling with tears he couldn't stop. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me." His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't answer right away. I looked up at the sky, at the clouds moving slowly, and thought about all the years I had spent carrying the burden of his disrespect. Forgiveness isn't something that comes easy. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about freeing yourself from what it did to you. I realized, at that moment, I didn't need his apology to find peace. I had already found it the moment the truth came out. I stood up slowly, my knees weak, but my heart steady. I looked at him, really looked at him. Not as the man who had hurt me, but as the boy I had raised. The boy I once carried on my shoulders, the boy I once believed would never grow cold. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You have to live with what you've done," I said quietly. "That's not my punishment to give. That's life's. But don't ever forget what this taught you. Money fades, pride burns, only respect lasts." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. He tried to speak, but no words came. I turned and walked back inside. I didn't look back because I didn't need to. Some moments are meant to be left where they happen. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands trembled slightly, but my heart was calm. For the first time in years, I felt light, like the weight I had carried had finally lifted. That evening, I asked the lawyer to keep the ownership exactly as it was. I didn't want to sell the house. I didn't want to take it from him either. I just wanted him to live there with the knowledge of truth. Every wall, every step, every piece of furniture would remind him of the man he once mocked. The house would no longer be a symbol of his success. It would be a reminder of his lesson. As I lay down that night, I thought about everything that had happened. My son had called me useless, but I had shown him what real strength looked like. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through patience, silence, and truth. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, maybe now he understands. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The words, the silence, the truth. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast and leaves only ashes. What I felt was something heavier, quieter, deeper, a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what was lost between us, and relief that life had finally revealed what needed to be seen. I thought about my son as a boy, small, innocent, full of dreams. I thought about how time and pride had changed him, how success had built a wall between us, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but distance. That wall had finally cracked today. It didn't crumble completely, but a small piece had fallen, enough for light to pass through. In the morning, the house was quiet. No laughter, no noise, no arrogance, just silence. My son didn't come out of his room. His wife left early, her footsteps sharp against the floor, her perfume lingering behind her like bitterness in the air. I made tea for myself and sat by the window, watching the sunlight spread across the yard. Everything looked calm, but inside me there was a storm. Not of anger, but of reflection. I kept thinking about what this all meant. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want him to suffer. What I wanted was understanding. For him to finally see the truth about respect, love, and what it really means to be rich. Around noon, he came downstairs. His eyes were swollen, his face pale. He looked like he hadn't slept either. He didn't say anything. He just sat across from me, his hands shaking slightly. We stayed like that for a while, two men connected by blood but separated by choices. I didn't speak. Sometimes silence teaches louder than any words. Finally, he whispered, "Dad, I don't know what to do." His voice was small, fragile, like a boy lost in a world he thought he understood. I looked at him and said softly, "Start by remembering." He frowned slightly, confused. I continued, "Remember who helped you when no one else did. Remember the nights someone worked while you slept. Remember the sacrifices made quietly, without asking for thanks. Respect starts where memory lives. You forgot. And that's why you fell." He nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes again. He understood now. Not fully, but enough. I could see the shame on his face, but also something else. Humility. The beginning of change. I told him I wasn't angry anymore. I told him I didn't want the house, the money, or the title. What I wanted was for him to never forget again. I wanted him to treat people with kindness, to value the ones who stood by him when he had nothing. "You called me useless," I said quietly. "But the truth is, a man who forgets where he came from is the one who becomes useless." He broke down then, not from guilt, but from realization. The kind of realization that cuts through pride and leaves only truth behind. He promised to make things right. I didn't stop him or encourage him. Some promises don't need to be heard. They just need to be lived. Time would show if he meant it. I could see in his eyes that something inside him had shifted. Maybe it was the first time he saw me, not as an old man, but as the foundation that carried him. Maybe it was the first time he truly understood the meaning of respect. That evening, as the sun set, I walked through the house slowly. My footsteps echoed through the halls, the same halls where I had once been ignored, insulted, and forgotten. But they didn't feel heavy anymore. Every wall, every corner, every room whispered a different sound now. Not pain, but peace. The truth had cleansed the house. It had turned shame into reflection, pride into humility. I stopped by his door before going to bed. I heard him inside, talking softly to someone on the phone. Maybe his wife, maybe his lawyer. His tone was calm, different. I didn't listen to his words. I didn't need to. I knew life had done what I could never do. It had humbled him. And humility, once learned, never leaves a man completely. That night I sat by the window and looked up at the stars. I thought of his mother. "He understands now," I whispered. "It took years, but he finally sees." A tear rolled down my cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from peace. My son had lost his pride, but maybe, just maybe, he had found his soul again. The next morning, I packed a small bag. I was leaving for a few days to visit an old friend. As I stepped outside, I looked back at the house one last time. It stood tall, quiet, golden in the morning light. Not as a monument of wealth, but as a lesson written in bricks and truth. Respect doesn't come from money. It comes from remembering who built the ground you stand on. And that, finally, was enough for me.